Dr. Elara Voss moved quickly through the bright halls of the research station Helios Prime as soft alarms echoed in the background and the metallic floor hummed beneath her boots. She had worked in deep space medicine for more than 10 years, and she thought she had seen almost every kind of injury, disease, and strange alien illness that the galaxy could throw at her, but today something was different and something was wrong. A soldier had been brought in only hours ago after a short battle with alien pirates at the edge of the Orion Gate. His armor was scorched and his breathing was heavy, yet his wounds were not fatal, and Elara expected a normal recovery. She guided him into the med bay and started a standard blood skin just as she had done countless times before the machine beeped softly as the crimson liquid moved through glass tubes and entered the main analyzer. At first nothing unusual appeared, but then the screen flashed bright red and displayed words she had never seen in her life. Unknown hazard detected, class Omega. Elara frowned and checked the settings, thinking it might be an error as she ran the scan again. And once more the same warning appeared, but now a strange image formed on the display. Under the microscope, she saw tiny black threads moving inside the red blood cells, and each thread shimmered faintly as if made of liquid shadow. She leaned closer, feeling the hair on her neck rise. The threads seemed to pulse in a slow rhythm, almost like a heartbeat, and they twisted to the blood like living things. She had seen many strange alien organisms, but nothing like this. It was not a parasite, not a virus, not anything that the med scanners could name. The station's AI voice suddenly spoke in a calm but sharp-tone analysis terminated by order of Galactic Protocol 7C. Cosmic biohazard detected, access restricted. Elara froze. Protocol 7C was something she had only heard whispered about in training. It was said to cover threats so dangerous they could destroy entire planets. The AI locked the data and sealed the sample tube inside a small containment chamber. Her terminal shut down by itself, and the med bay door sealed with a hiss. A moment later, heavy footsteps approached the sliding door, opened to reveal two soldiers in dark armor, bearing the insignia of the Galactic Council. They stepped inside. Without speaking, one of them scanning the room, while the other took a sealed container from his belt and placed it beside the sample. The taller one finally spoke. "Doctor, you are to step away from the analyzer. The sample is now under Council authority. You will not access any part of this research from this moment forward." Elara felt her mouth go dry. She had never seen the Council act so fast or so cold. She asked what was inside the blood and why it was being taken. The soldier only said this information is classified at the highest level. Then they took the container with the sealed sample and left as quickly as they had come. A med bay door locked again from the outside, leaving her alone with the quiet hum of machines. She sat down slowly, replaying the strange sight in her mind, those shimmering black threads moving like they had a will of their own. It made no sense. Humans were not supposed to carry anything unknown to galactic medicine, and certainly nothing that triggered a class Omega alert. She remembered the way the threads seemed to pulse, as if alive, and she could not shake the feeling that they were aware of being watched. The station returned to its normal routine in the hours that followed, but Elara could not focus on her duties. Rumors began to spread among the crew that a dangerous alien weapon had been found aboard the station, but no one knew the truth. She knew better, though, and what she knew was worse, because the weapon was not alien. It was inside a human soldier's veins. Later that night, Elara walked through quiet halls toward her private quarters, but she noticed small surveillance drones floating near her door. They scanned her face and recorded her every move. She understood now that she was under watch. The Council was not only taking the sample, they were making sure she did not talk about it to anyone. Lying awake in her bunk, she stared at the dim lights on the ceiling, and her mind kept drifting back to the shimmering black threads. What could they do? Why were they in human blood? How long had they been there without anyone noticing? And why did the AI and the Council treat them as a cosmic hazard? She knew the answers would not be easy to find, but one thing was certain: whatever was hidden in human blood was powerful enough to make the most advanced governments in the galaxy afraid. Far away beyond the walls of Helios Prime, deep in the shadows of space, other eyes had noticed the alert. A silent signal had traveled faster than light to unknown receivers, and in the darkness, alien minds turned their attention toward Earth and the humans who lived there in the days to come. The question would not be whether humans were dangerous, but how dangerous they truly were. The next morning, the halls of Helios Prime felt different, as if the air itself was heavier and filled with something unseen. The normal chatter of engineers and crew was replaced with quiet glances and whispers that stopped a moment. Someone from security walked by. Dr. Elara Voss moved through the corridors with a calm face, but inside her thoughts raced in endless circles. She kept replaying the image of the black shimmering threads and the soldier's blood over and over, wondering if she had. Imagine the way they seemed to move with purpose. Her ship began in the med bay as always, but when she arrived, two strangers in white coats were already there. They were not part of her team and wore no-name tags. Their eyes followed her every step. One of them, a tall man with silver hair and a voice as smooth as glass, spoke in a tone that carried quiet authority. Dr. Voss, from now on, all your medical work will be reviewed and approved by the Galactic Council Science Division. You are not to run any scans without our presence. Elara asked why. And the man's thin smile did not reach his eyes. Because we say so. Dr. the Council does not want mistakes with sensitive matters. The soldier whose blood had caused the alert was gone from the med bay. No one would tell her where he had been moved. She checked the medical logs, but they had been wiped clean, as if he had never been there. The more she looked, the more she saw the fingerprints of a cover-up files, deleted access codes, changed staff, reassigned, without warning. It was like watching a shadow spread across the station, swallowing every trace of what she had seen. Later in the day, she sat alone in the staff cafeteria, pretending to read a datapad, when a quiet voice spoke from behind her. It was Kieran Rawl, a communications officer she had known for years. He leaned close and whispered, "You are being watched." Elara did not look up from the pad and asked softly, "How do you know?" Kieran slid into the seat across from her, his eyes shifting to the corners of the room, where small hovering drones kept their silent patrol. The council sent encrypted orders to cut certain transmissions yesterday. I am the one who handled them. He paused, glancing at her face. I saw the alert about your patient, the one with the Omega tag. Her heart beat faster. Kieran was not supposed to know about that. And if he did, it meant someone inside the council was not as careful as they thought. She asked what else he knew. He said only that the alert triggered a data burst to multiple council ships and to something else, something off the official network. That part was strange because it used an old code one not seen in over 100 years. Before she could ask, more voice called her name from a cafeteria entrance. It was a tall, silver-haired man again, flanked by two armored guards. "Dr. Voss, you are needed in Lab 7 now." She stood, trying to mask her unease, and followed them to the long, narrow corridors toward a restricted wing. Lab 7 was cold and dim, lit only by the glow of a large containment tank. At its center inside the tank floated a faint red mist, shifting and curling like smoke and water. Elara stepped closer, her breath catching the mist pulse in the same rhythm as the black threads she had seen in the soldier's blood. The silver-haired man spoke quietly. "This was extracted from your patient. It is alive in a way we do not understand yet, and it is older than any life form known to the galaxy. The Council calls it the Red Veil, and it is found only in human blood." She stared at the tank, unable to speak. The mist seemed to ripple, as if aware of her presence, and for a moment she thought she saw shapes forming inside, like shadows of things that could not be real to man. Continue, "We believe this is why certain alien factions have kept their distance from humanity. It is not fear of your weapons or your technology. It is fear of what you carry inside you." He walked to a control panel and tapped a few commands. A section of the mist began to swirl faster, almost violently. The glass of the tank vibrated, and Elara felt a sharp pressure in her head, as if something was trying to push into her thoughts. She stumbled back, clutching her temples. The man shut down the display, and the mist calmed instantly. That was only a fraction of his potential. Doctor left unchecked, it can adapt, consume, and replicate faster than any known organism. It could spread across worlds before anyone could stop it. This is why the Council keeps it secret, why they watch you now, because you saw it, and that makes you a risk. Elara's voice was unsteady. "Why not destroy?" If the man's smile returned, "That would be impossible. The Red Veil is part you, part of all humans. To destroy, we would have to destroy your species." The weight of his words settled over her like cold stone. She realized now the Council was not just hiding the truth from other worlds. They were protecting themselves from the possibility that the secret might one day escape their control. She thought of the soldier, the black threads twisting inside his blood. The way the mist had seemed to sense her presence. If every human carried this thing, then the galaxy's fear made terrible sense. That night she found a coded message slipped under her quarters door. The handwriting was sharp and hurried. "Meet me in maintenance sector E at midnight. Trust." No one was signed, but she knew it was from Kieran. The words "trust no one" kept echoing in her mind as she moved through the silent corridors toward the meeting point. The maintenance sector was dark and smelled of machine oil. The hum of the station's engines vibrated through the walls. Kieran stepped out from behind a stack of cargo crates and handed her a small data chip. "I copied the Council's files before they locked me out. It is everything they know about the Red Veil, including transmissions sent to ships not under Council control." Elara slid the chip into her pocket and asked why he was risking this. He looked at her seriously. "Because someone else is looking for it, and they are not human. Before she could ask who, the floor beneath them shook violently. A deep alarm blared through the sector. Emergency klaxons flashed red across the walls as the station's AI announced in a cold voice, unidentified vessel approaching breach. An outer hull detected all personnel. To secure locations, Kieran grabbed her arm. This is not an accident. They are here for the veil, and they know you have seen it. The walls of maintenance sector, he trembled as another deep impact shook the station lights, flickering and casting long, restless shadows over the metal floor. Elara's pulse pounded in her ears. As the alarm continued its steady scream, Kieran pulled her toward a narrow side corridor, his grip strong and urgent. "We cannot stay here," he said, his voice low, but fierce. "They will cut to the outer hull in minutes, and this part of the station will be the first." To lose air, she glanced back once at the red, flashing signs that marked the sealed blast doors, and knew there would be no turning back. The narrow corridor was lined with old machinery, some of it so outdated it had not been touched in years. Dust floated in the air, shimmering in the flicker of failing lights. They moved quickly, ducking under hanging cables, stepping over tool crates and discarded metal sheets. Kieran stopped at a rusted hatch and began working its manual lock. With a small device from his belt, the sound of metal scraping echoed to the passage as he forced it open. Inside was a vertical shaft lit only by the dim blue glow of emergency strips. He pointed upward. "This will take us to level, for we can cut across to the secondary comm hub from there," and sent a warning before they shut down the network entirely. Elara climbed first, her hands gripping the cold metal rungs. The hum of the station's engines seemed distant here, replaced by the faint hollow groans of the structure under stress. She tried not to imagine the hull tearing open to the void just meters away. When she reached the top, Kieran was right behind her, and they emerged into a small maintenance access room. The air was stale, the lights barely functional, and the smell of burnt wiring hung heavy. They made their way toward the comm hub, moving along empty corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly. Without sound at first, it seemed the attackers had not yet reached this section. But then they turned a corner, and froze ahead stood three tall figures blocking the hallway. Their bodies were covered in smooth dark armor that seemed to ripple faintly like liquid under light. No visible weapons, yet the air around them felt heavy and electric, as if charged with invisible currents. Their eyes were hidden behind featureless helmets, but Elara could feel them watching. One of the figures tilted its head slightly, a movement so slow and deliberate it made her skin prickle. The armor shifted, and small lines of faint crimson light began to trace along its surface. Kieran took a step back, pulling her with him. The figure in the center spoke a sound that was not words, but a layer vibration that seemed to press against her skull. She could not understand the meaning, but somehow she felt the intent they were here for. The red veil. Kieran raised his hand slowly, trying to appear non-threatening. "We do not have what you want," he said. The central figure stepped forward, and the armor's lights brightened, pulsing like a heartbeat. Elara's head filled with an almost tangible pressure, her vision blurred, shapes stretching and twisting, as if reality itself was bending. Then, without warning, the figure moved with impossible speed, closing the distance. In a single step, a cold, armored hand reached toward her, but Kieran shoved her aside. The impact sent him sprawling, and the device in his belt skittered across the floor. Elara scrambled for the device, her fingers closing around it as the other two armored beings advanced. She activated the first function she found, and a burst of bright white light filled the corridor. The figures staggered for just a moment, their armor rippling violently, as if trying to absorb the sudden surge. Kieran shouted, "Run!" and they did, turning down a side passage at full speed. The sound of pursuit followed close behind, a rhythmic thud of heavy armored steps echoing in the confined space. They reached the comm hub, but the reinforced door was sealed with council security lock. Elara's hands shook as she tried to access the panel, but her clearance was already revoked. She turned to Kieran, who was working on the override. His face was pale, and focused sweat streaking down his temples. "Hurry," she urged, but before he could finish, the door shuddered and slid open from inside. Standing there was Dr. Elara's old mentor, Dr. Semric Vale, his eyes sharp behind his thin spectacles. He pulled them inside and sealed the door behind them. "You've been busy," he said in a tone that was calm, but carried an edge of urgency. The comm hub was dark, except for the glow of monitors showing fractured images of the station's outer decks, multiple hull breaches, flashing red icons across the schematics. Semric gestured to one feed that showed the attackers forcing open another sealed hatch. "These are not ordinary mercenaries," he said. "They are seekers of the veil, an ancient order that hunts anything connected to the substance you saw." Elara asked how he knew about them. Semric looked at her for a long moment. "Because I used to work for them." Before she could respond, he began typing rapidly on the console. The system is already compromised, but I can send a short burst to the old network, the same one that flagged your patient. If we are lucky someone still listening will answer. He tapped the final command, and a low hum filled the room, followed by a faint pulse on one of the screens. A signal had been sent, but almost instantly another icon appeared, showing an incoming trace they know. "We are here," Kieran said grimly. The sound of metal tearing echoed from the outer hallway. The reinforced doors shook under the impact of something powerful. Samrick reached under the console and pulled out a small black case, opening it to reveal a vial of faint red mist identical to what Elara had seen in the lab. "This is a sample," he said. "Take it and run if they get this to station, and everyone on it will be lost." Elara stared at the vial, its contents shifting slowly as, if alive, she slipped it into her coat, feeling its cold weight against her side. The door gave way with a loud screech, and the armored figure stepped inside, their movement slow, but unstoppable. The crimson lines along their armor now burned bright, casting eerie reflections across the room. Samrick turned toward them, holding up his hands, and speaking in that same strange, layered tone Elara had heard before the figures hesitated for just a second. Kieran grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the back exit. Samrick's voice rose into a harsh command, and the Seekers turned their focus on him, giving them the opening they needed. They ran through the emergency access tunnels of the station, shaking more violently with each step. Somewhere deep in its core systems were failing alarms, blaring warnings of power loss and decompression. They reached a small cargo bay where a single maintenance shuttle sat waiting. Its hatch open. Kieran jumped into the pilot's seat, powering it up as Elara strapped and the hatch sealed, and the engines roared to life. The shuttle lifted from the deck just as the far wall of the cargo bay exploded inward. The Seekers stepped through fire and smoke, their armor glowing like molten metal. Kieran punched the controls, and the shuttle shot forward to the breach into the cold black void of space. The station fell away behind them, a distant shape wreathed in bursts of light and shadow. As they cleared the debris field, Elara looked down at the vial in her hands. A faint mist inside pulsed once, then again like a heartbeat. She had the feeling it was not just reacting to her touch, but to something else, something waiting for them out there in the endless dark. The shuttle drifted away from the burning station, silent, except for the low hum of its aging engines. Elara sat by the viewport, staring at the endless stars, her hands still clutching the small vial of crimson mist. She could still feel the faint pulse inside it, as if it had a life of its own. Kieran kept his eyes fixed on the flight, controls guiding him toward a cluster of distant lights barely visible against the black void that is Kareth. He said softly, "A world no one visits anymore." Hours passed in uneasy silence, broken only by the soft beeps of the navigation console. The closer they came, the clearer the planet became, a massive sphere of deep red clouds swirling endlessly over dark land masses, and black seas lightning forked across the atmosphere, casting quick flashes that revealed mountains like jagged teeth and rivers that glowed faintly from unknown minerals. Elara felt a weight in her chest as they entered the upper atmosphere, the shuttle rattling under the strain of re-entry. The red skies seemed alive, shifting and folding like an ocean of storm. They broke through clouds into a landscape unlike any Elara had seen. Vast plains of black grass stretched in all directions under a blood-red sun. Tall spires of stone rose like frozen flames, their surfaces carved with strange runes that glimmered faintly in the light. The air shimmered with heat, yet carried a strange coolness that brushed against her skin. Kieran guided the shuttle toward a canyon hidden between two towering ridges of rock. The narrow pass led to a cavern large enough to hide the ship from view. He landed without speaking and powered everything down until only the soft hum of standby systems remained. Once outside, Elara breathed in the strange air. It had a metallic taste and seemed heavier than what she was used to. She followed Kieran to the canyon until they reached a flat area where ancient structures half buried in black sand stood silent, and broken walls were made from the same dark stone as the spires, covered in faded markings. Some of the shapes looked almost like human faces, twisted and elongated. Kieran explained that this place was once a research outpost for the first explorers who came here long before the council was formed, but something drove them away and no one returned. They entered one of the larger ruins, stepping carefully over fallen beams and shattered tiles. Inside, the air was cooler shadows stretching across wide halls. Supported by cracked pillars in the center of the main chamber stood a round table of smooth black stone, its surface etched with deep grooves forming a pattern. Elara ran her fingers over it and felt a faint vibration, almost like the vial in her pocket. She glanced at Kieran, but he was already moving toward a set of stairs leading deeper underground. He said they needed to find the vault if it still existed. The stairs spiraled downward into darkness, the air growing colder with each step at the bottom. They found a massive door made from a single slab of stone marked with more of the strange runes. A faint red light glowed from the cracks between them. Without a word, Kieran placed his hand on the surface, and the runes flared brighter. The door slid open soundlessly, revealing a chamber lit by tall crystal rods casting soft red light. Along the walls were shelves filled with containers, scrolls, and devices, none of which looked familiar to Elara. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it rested another vial, identical to the one she carried. The mist inside swirled lazily before pausing, as if sensing her presence for a moment. Both vials pulsed in unison, and she felt a sudden rush of images in her mind. Endless battles fought under alien skies, rivers turning, red mountains crumbling under weapons of impossible power, armies of beings both human and alien, standing together then falling apart as a shadow spread across the stars. She gasped and staggered, Kieran catching her before she fell. He told her the truth, then, as people had always known about the Red Veil and the power it carried. Long ago, humans had been changed by it, becoming stronger, faster, and more than what they were meant to be. The Seekers of the Veil were not only hunters, they were also the last survivors of those who had tried to stop humanity before the change could spread. The war had ended with a fragile truce, and the Council had buried the truth, but now something had broken that balance, and the Seekers had returned. Before Elara could ask more, a deep tremor shook the chamber. Dust fell from the ceiling, and one of the crystal rods shattered, spilling red sparks onto the floor. Kieran's eyes widened. They have found us. He moved quickly to take the second vial, but the moment his hand touched it, the glow from the runes along the walls flared, and the shelves began to slide back, revealing narrow passages. Beyond them came the sound of heavy armored steps echoing through the stone. Elara clutched the first vial tighter as Kieran pulled her toward one of the hidden passages. They ran through the narrow tunnel to red light, fading behind them, replaced by total darkness. The only sounds were their own footsteps and the distant thud of pursuit. The tunnel opened into a vast underground cavern lit by pools of faint blue liquid that rippled as they passed. Strange plants with thin black leaves grew along the edges, swaying as if in a breeze, though the air was still. In the distance, they could see a platform built from the same dark stone rising above the cavern floor. Upon it stood a structure shaped like an arch, its surface covered in glowing runes. Kieran said it was a gate left by the first ones who came to Kareth, a way out if they could power it. Before the Seekers reached them, they climbed the steps to the arch, and Kieran began activating the controls. Carved into the stone, the runes pulsed one by one until the entire arch shimmered with a sheet of shifting light. The sound of the Seekers was growing louder, their armored steps now joined by a low mechanical hum. Elara turned to see their shapes emerging from the tunnel, red lines blazing across their armor. She stepped back toward the arch, clutching both vials. The mist inside each pulsed faster and faster until it seemed almost alive. Kieran shouted for her to go through, but she hesitated, staring at the glowing light. It felt like stepping into a storm, yet also like walking towards something she had always known was waiting. The Seekers reached the base of the steps, their movement slow but certain. The leader raised a hand, and the air between them shimmered with invisible force. Kieran grabbed Elara's arm and pulled her toward the arch. Together they stepped into the light, and the world around them dissolved. The last thing she saw before everything vanished was the leader of the Seekers, standing perfectly still, his armor glowing brighter than ever, as if marking their escape. The light faded slowly, leaving Elara standing on soft ground that felt almost like sand, yet seemed to pulse faintly under her feet. Around her, the air shimmered with colors she could not name, and the sky was neither day nor night. Instead, it was a swirling expanse of deep blues, purples, and streaks of silver, like rivers flowing to the heavens. The arch they had stepped through stood behind them, glowing faintly before its light dimmed, and it became nothing more than dark stone. Kieran stood a few steps away, scanning the horizon. His expression was tense, but there was also something like wonder in his eyes. He told her they had arrived at the threshold, a place outside of normal space and time, where worlds touched but did not meet. Few beings had ever walked here, and fewer still had returned. It was said that in the threshold the truth behind all things could be found if one knew where to look, but also that the threshold was alive, and it chose who could stay and who must leave. Elara turned slowly, taking in the landscape. It was endless rolling hills of luminous grass that shifted color of the wind in the distance. She saw what looked like mountains made of glass, their peaks catching the light in strange waves, streams of clear liquid wound between the hills. But when she looked closely, she saw the water did not flow as it should. Instead, it seemed to move both forward and backward at the same time, creating ripples that canceled each other out. They began walking with no clear path, the ground always warm beneath their feet, but the air carrying a faint coolness, like early morning in her home city. Each step seemed to echo, though there was no sound around them after some time. They came to a wide plain where the grass gave way to smooth black stone. At the center of the plain stood a massive structure shaped like a spiral tower. Without windows or doors, its surface was etched with more runes she had seen before, but these pulsed with a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Kieran approached the tower, cautiously running his hand over the markings. He explained that the threshold was a place built and shaped by the first ones beings older than the stars themselves. They had created it as a bridge between realities and as a prison for things that could not be destroyed. The tower was one of many seals that kept those things contained. He feared that the red veil of power inside the vials might be connected to what was trapped here. And if that was true, then bringing it into the threshold could be dangerous beyond measure. As they stood before the tower, the ground beneath them shivered. A low hum filled the air, not from the tower, but from somewhere far beyond the horizon. The sky darkened, the silver rivers above twisting into tighter spirals, until they formed a single point directly overhead. A beam of pale light shot down from that point, striking the tower. The runes flared so bright that Elara had to shield her eyes, and she felt the vials in her pocket grow hot against her skin. Kieran grabbed her arm and pulled her away from the tower. Just as cracks began to appear along its base from the gaps, spilled a strange mist darker than night, and filled with shifting shapes. The mist did not spread like smoke, but instead curled upward, forming tendrils that reached toward the sky. A voice unlike anything she had heard whispered through the air, speaking in a language she could not understand, yet somehow felt deep in her mind it was not one voice, but many layered together like a storm of whispers and roars. They ran across the plain, heading toward a distant ridge that looked like it might offer cover. The ground shook again, and the mist surged outward in a wave, forcing them to leap across a fissure that had not been there moments before. The air grew heavy, and each breath felt like pulling in liquid metal. But they did not slow. Reaching the ridge, they found a narrow pass leading into another valley. Here the grass was taller and glowed faintly, casting a green light over everything. Kieran stopped to catch his breath and told her that whatever was inside the tower had sensed the red veil. The vials were not just containers, but keys able to open seals across the threshold. The danger was far greater than the Seekers or the Council had ever admitted, and now something older than both might be free. To follow them, Elara felt the weight of the vials like chains at her side, but she also knew they could not leave them behind at the wrong. Hands found them, entire worlds could fall. They decided to head toward the glass mountain she had seen earlier, hoping that the higher ground might give them a view of the land, and perhaps reveal another gateway to climb. Was slow. The grass giving way to sharp crystalline shards that cut their boots. The air grew thinner, and the strange sky seemed closer, its colors shifting faster, as if time itself was unraveling above them. The peaks glimmered like frozen lightning, and she felt a strange pull drawing her toward the tallest one. By the time they reached a wide ledge near the peak, the plain they had crossed was barely visible far below from here. She could see more of the threshold. Vast oceans of silver light lay beyond the hills, and in the distance more spiral towers rose like giants guarding unseen prisons. But what caught her breath was the sight of a vast shadow moving beneath the surface of the silver oceans. Something enormous swam there, too large to be fully seen, each movement sending ripples through the sky above. Kieran followed her gaze, and his face grew pale. He said that was one of the keepers, ancient beings bound to this place to ensure that nothing escaped their prisons. If a keeper was stirring, it meant the balance of the threshold was already breaking. And their time here was short. They needed to find the next arch and leave before the threshold decided their fate for them. As they began moving along the ridge, a sudden roar shook the air. The shadow in the silver ocean surged upward, and for a moment they saw its form. A massive shape covered in countless eyes, each one glowing like a star's body, was a shifting mass of scales and tendrils that reached toward the mountains. The roar came again, and the very ground shook. Elara felt her knees weaken, but Kieran pulled her onward, telling her to keep her eyes on the path and not on the keeper. They descended the far side of the mountain into a narrow valley where streams of glowing water cut through black stone. Following the streams, they soon found another arch half buried in the ground. This one was different from the first. Its runes were darker, and the light inside its frame flickered like a dying flame. Kieran knelt by the base, inspecting the carvings, and said the arch was unstable. It could still work, but they would have only one chance, and if it failed, they could be trapped here forever. The air behind them shifted, and the glow from the water dimmed. A cold wind swept through the valley, carrying with it the sound of whispers like those from the tower. Elara turned to see the dark mist seeping into the valley, curling over the rocks, and reaching for the arch. The vials in her hands pulsed harder than ever, and she felt a strange warmth spread up her arms, as if urging her to act. Without thinking, she stepped toward the arch and held both vials. Up to its surface, the runes flared. brighter, and the flickering light steadied, forming a stable curtain of silver. The light faded again, and Elara staggered forward onto cold stone streets beneath a sky split in two. On one side the clouds swirled in golden light. On the other black storms boiled and clashed with flashes of pale green. Lightning, the air smelled of metal and smoke, and somewhere far away she could hear the slow beat of heavy drums. The arch they had come through stood in the middle of a plaza surrounded by tall, jagged towers built from a black material that seemed to drink the light. Kieran took a slow breath and told her they'd entered the shattered city, a place where the threshold touched a dozen worlds. At once parts of it were ancient, older than any known star, while other parts were new and unstable, shifting as the current of time changed. The people who lived here were wanderers, traders, mercenaries, and exiles from many galaxies. The city was said to be neutral ground, but in truth it was ruled by factions that watched each other with cold suspicion and sometimes open hostility. Figures began to gather at the edges of the plaza, drawn by the sudden flare of the arch. They were not all humans. Some were tall and thin, with skin like polished stone and glowing eyes. Others had scale faces and extra arms, each gripping a weapon. Elara saw a being whose entire body seemed to be made of flowing water, held in shape by bands of silver. A low murmur passed through the crowd as their eyes fell on the vials in her hands. Kieran noticed too, and his hand went to the hilt of his blade, though he kept it sheathed. A voice called out from the edge of the plaza. It belonged to a woman with silver hair and eyes like molten gold. She wore armor made of overlapping plates that shimmered faintly as she moved. Her tone was calm, but carried authority. She said they should follow her quickly before the wrong eyes saw too much. Kieran hesitated, but the crowd was growing thicker, and Elara could feel the weight of their stares, so they followed. The woman led them through narrow streets lit by floating orbs of blue fire. The buildings here leaned inward, almost touching above their heads, casting long shadows across the path. She moved with purpose, taking turns without hesitation, until they reached a heavy door set into the base of a tower. She tapped a sequence on a panel, and the door slid open, revealing a chamber filled with maps, glowing screens, and strange weapons arranged along the walls. Several others were inside, all wearing armor like hers, though each set was marked with a different crest. She introduced herself as Lyra, captain of the Gilded Veil, one of the factions that controlled parts of the shattered city. Her group specialized in tracking and protecting rare artifacts, and she had recognized the Red Veil vials. At once she told them quietly that there were whispers of a coming war between the factions, and that the vials could tip the balance in ways no one fully understood. Already agents from other groups would be searching for them, and if they were caught, the outcome would be disastrous. Kieran explained what had happened in the threshold and how the dark mist had followed them through two gates. Lyra's expression darkened at the mention of the mist. She said the shattered city had its own shadows, and that if the mist entered here, it could corrupt the gates, linking worlds, causing entire sectors of the city to collapse into chaos. She offered them protection for night, but warned they could not stay long. The Gilded Veil had enemies and secrets, and if word spread too far, their location would be compromised. Elara was shown to a small room lit by a single lamp. The walls were covered with old cloth banners marked with runes that seemed to move slightly when she looked at them too long. She could not sleep, though her mind replayed the sight of the Keeper in the silver ocean, and the way the vials had pulsed as they approached the arch. It felt less like she was carrying an object, and more like she was carrying something alive, something aware. In the middle of the night, a faint sound woke her. It was not footsteps, but a kind of vibration through the floor. She stepped quietly to the door and opened it just enough to see down the hall. A shadow moved past the far end of the corridor. It shaped thin and stretched as if the light bent strangely around it. It did not walk, but seemed to slide across the floor, leaving a faint dark trail behind. Elara's heart pounded. She thought of the mist from the threshold and the whispering voices that had followed them. She hurried to wake Kieran and Lyra. When Lyra saw her expression, she grabbed a weapon from the wall and ordered her people to seal the outer doors. But before they could reach the main hall, the lights flickered and a cold wind swept through the chamber, bringing with it the smell of the black plane from the threshold. The shadow was inside, now moving faster, its form shifting between solid and smoke every time it passed near a person. They staggered, clutching their heads as if hearing something painful and deep. Kieran drew his blade and struck at the shadow, but his weapon passed through it with little effect. Lyra shouted that they needed light pure and unbroken. She smashed with the floating orbs against the floor, and for a moment the shadow recoiled, hissing in a sound that was both a whisper and a scream. Elara felt the vials grow hot again, and without thinking she pulled them out. The glow inside them flared so bright the room was washed in red light. The shadow froze as if pinned, and then it dissolved into a thin mist that was pulled toward the ceiling before vanishing entirely. The room fell silent except for the sound of heavy breathing. Lyra turned to Elara with a mix of fear and respect, saying that the vials were more than keys. They were also weapons, but weapons that could not be easily controlled. The energy inside them would answer to only certain blood, and she suspected that Elara's was among them. The danger was greater than she had thought, and now more than ever other factions would hunt them. By dawn, the city was already awake, the streets buzzing with merchants, guards, and travelers from across the stars. The drums she had heard before now beat louder, echoing through the towers. Lyra explained that the drums marked the start of the trade conclave, a gathering where deals were struck, alliances made, and betrayals planned. It would be the perfect place for enemies to find them. She suggested using the conclave as cover to move toward another gate, one that might take them out of the city and deeper into the connected worlds. They left the safety of the Gilded Veil stronghold, dressed in plain clothes, to blend in the markets of the shattered city, where a riot of color and sound stalls overflowed with goods from 100 worlds, glowing crystals, singing metal flowers, fruits that change color as they ripened. Traders shouted in dozens of languages, and the smell of spices, oil, and strange meats filled the air. But beneath the noise, Elara felt the constant hum of tension eyes, watching from shadowed doorways, shapes that seemed to move just beyond her vision. At the heart of the market, they saw the conclave stage, a vast platform surrounded by banners and guarded by soldiers in gleaming armor. Leaders from the factions stood there speaking to the crowd, their words lost in the roar of voices. Kieran leaned close and pointed toward a narrow alley at the far side beyond it. He said it was the path to the gate they needed, but as they began moving that way, Elara saw a flash of silver hair among the crowd, not Lyra, but someone wearing armor marked with the crest of the Gilded Veil, and watching them intently. The crowd around the conclave stage swelled until Elara could barely move. She felt the heat of bodies, the press of shoulders, the hum of hundreds of voices mixing into a single low roar. The figure with silver hair pushed forward, eyes locked on her, and the vials she carried behind him. Kieran kept one hand near his blade, scanning the shifting faces around them and marking every shadow that moved. Too close, the banners above flapped wildly in a wind that seemed to come from nowhere. The drums pounded louder, now matching the rhythm of Elara's racing heart. She tried to push toward the alley, but the crowd surged in the opposite direction, sweeping her closer to the stage. The leaders of the faction stood there, arguing, their words sharp and cold even from this distance. She could feel the tension thick in the air. Lyra's crest gleamed on the chest of the silver-haired figure, and for a moment Elara thought perhaps this was an ally sent to help them. But then the figure's lips curved into a smile that did not reach the eyes, and she felt a chill run through her veins. The vials began to pulse again, their glow faint at first, but growing brighter with every heartbeat. The silver-haired figure reached out a hand, and the crowd seemed to part as if obeying some unseen command. Kieran stepped between them and Elara, but the figure only tilted their head and said in a voice like smooth glass that she had no idea what she was carrying. They spoke of an ancient gate hidden in the oldest part of the city, a place built before the shattered city even had a name, a gate that opened not to another world, but to the origin of all blood, the first source, the seed of the human chain, and the alien chains bound to it. Before Elara could reply, a deep tremor shook the ground. The stage cracked in two, and from the gap rose a black mist thicker than any she had seen before, poured upward, twisting into shapes with too many limbs and too many eyes. The leaders of the factions drew weapons and shouted orders. Soldiers rushed to form a line, but the mist swept through them without slowing. Those it touched fell to their knees, clutching their heads and screaming before going still, their eyes turning the same pale green she had seen in the lightning over the city. The silver-haired figure moved closer, saying the vials were the only way to control what was coming. The mist was older than the city, older than the gates, older even than the stars. It was a hunger that had followed the first travelers across the void and fed on their fear. They said the vials were made from the blood of the first who had faced it and survived. That same blood was in Elara now, and it would answer only to her. Kieran urged her to run, but the crowd had broken into chaos, people screaming and pushing in every direction. The mist was spreading faster, curling to the streets and towers in the distance. Bells began to ring, warning of a full breach. Lyra appeared from the far side of the plaza, her armor scorched and her blade wet with black liquid. She shouted that they had to get to the Blood Gate before the mist reached it, or the entire city would be lost. The silver-haired figure turned and started toward a road leading deeper into the city. Lyra growled that they could not be trusted, but they knew the fastest path, and there was no time to argue. Four of them ran together through winding streets, past burning stalls and crumbling walls. The sky above shifted wildly gold The storm stormed to a strange deep red that made the air feel heavy. The drums had stopped, replaced by the distant cries of the wounded and the sickening hum of the mist. They reached the oldest quarter of the city, where the buildings were made of stone so dark it seemed to swallow the light. The streets were empty here, as if the mist had not yet dared to come this far. At the center stood a circular plaza marked with carvings older than any language Elara knew. In its middle was the blood gate, a ring of bone-white stone covered in symbols that pulsed faintly like veins beneath skin. In front of it stood 6 statues each, one carved in the shape of a figure with human features but alien eyes. The silver-haired figure said the gate was locked by blood, and only the one chosen by the vials could open it. They told Elara to step forward and place her hands on the central stone pillar. Kieran and Lyra stood on either side, ready for whatever came next. The mist had found them again, now swirling into the plaza, its edge flickering with tendrils that reached out like fingers searching for prey. Elara took a breath and placed her hands on the pillar. The vials in her belt flared blindingly bright. The carvings on the gate lit up one by one in a ripple of crimson light. The ground shook, and the statues turned their heads toward her. Their stone eyes, glowing, a low voice rumbled through the air, speaking in a language she did not understand, yet somehow felt in her bones. The gate began to turn, its inner ring spinning faster and faster until space within it became a swirling pool of blood. Red light. The mist screamed a sound that was both inside and outside her head, and surged forward. Kieran and Lyra fought to hold it back, their weapons leaving trails of light as they struck. But the mist simply split around them, reforming. Seconds later, Elara felt something pull at her from inside. The gate of force, both warm and terrifying, it whispered promises of strength, of knowledge, of safety. If she would only step through, she could see shapes moving within the red light, shadows of beings tall and thin, with eyes like fire reaching out to her. The silver-haired figure shouted that she had to choose now, either seal the gate forever or open it fully and let the blood return to its source. Alara's hands shook. The warmth from the light was growing into heat, and she could feel her own pulse matching the rhythm of the gate behind her. Kieran shouted for her to seal it. Lyra cried that as she opened it, the mist would follow and consume more than just the city. But Elara also remembered the keepers' words in the silver ocean, that the blood was the only way to end the hunger. The mist lunged and wrapped around her legs, cold burning. At the same time, she screamed, and the vials burst with light. The force blasted the mist back, tearing chunks of it into smoke. But it was already recovering. She looked at the gate and made her choice. Her voice rang out over the chaos, not in words, but in the same deep tone she had heard from the gate. The red light flared so bright the plaza vanished in its glow. When the light faded, Elara was standing alone before the pillar. The gate was gone, so was the mist. The plaza was silent and empty, the air heavy with the scent of rain far above. The sky was clear for the first time since she had arrived in the city. A single banner hung from a broken tower, its crest unknown to her. She looked down and saw the vials were empty, the glow gone, leaving only clear glass. She did not know where Kieran, Lyra, or the silver-haired figure had gone, but in her blood she felt a new weight of presence watching from far away. Somewhere beyond the gates, the hunger was still out there waiting.